Players gather to cast powerful spells, some of the oldest and most revered in the history of Magic the Gathering. Coveted Jewel, Doomsday, Spoils of the Vault, and many others, battling head-to-head in brutal combat. They all have one thing in common: to uphold their legacy and the search for eternal glory.
The Eternal Glory podcast is brought to you by the minds behind Bosch and Roll on YouTube, Arabian University, and theepicstorm.com. This episode is sponsored by Moxfield and financial advisor and certified financial planner Nicholas Robb.
Hello, and welcome to episode 146 of the Eternal Glory podcast, Adapting to Sudden Changes. We've already recorded 30 minutes of introductions and banter for the week, available in our supporter-exclusive pre-show. Check out patreon.com/eternalglory to gain access, or join as a YouTube member for the same content on YouTube instead. As always, I'm Phil Gallagher, aka Thraben U.
I am Brian Coval, aka Bosch and Roll.
And I am Brian Cook of the Epic Storm.
Shout out to our new paid members since the last episode. There's a bunch of you. We must have done a good job last time. We've got Corey H., Jacob A., Ethan C., Matthew D., Richard M., Mark C., Jeff, Burns the Fern, The Entertainer, William M., and Chris W. A lot of new members who got to hear us talk a lot of shit last week. We had a pretty negative pre-show last week. I'm not going to lie. People like the negativity. There's a little bit of shit talk in this one. Check it out. And a new thing that we're doing, we are trying to get affiliated or partnered with Spotify, whatever their measure thing is. If it is all the same to you, please listen on Spotify. If you have a place you prefer to listen, it doesn't matter. We'd prefer you listening to not listening. But if it's all the same to you, please listen on Spotify from here on out.
Yeah, we're roughly 50% of our consumption hours total in order to meet that metric. So help us get there. It wouldn't be that big of a deal, but it would mean a lot to us.
To win in Magic, adjust your strategy as the game changes. The same is true of investments. Nicholas Ropp, financial advisor and certified financial planner, can help you create a game plan for your financial goals. Call 314-968-3783 or email nicholas.ropp@edwardjones.com. That's nicholas.raupp@edwardjones.com to get started today. Edward Jones, member SIPC.
If you're interested in advertising to 10,000 plus Eternal gamers every episode, reach out to us. We're always accepting new sponsors.
And that brings us to our topic today, which last week we kind of blew out our brakes on all of our thoughts about the upcoming ban announcement. And we might have done that an episode early because we still have a whole episode here for a format we're not very excited about that we think is going to get shaken up on Monday after this coming Monday. So still a week and a half after this pod drops. So we're still a ways away from that, but we're all waiting for it. If I didn't have to play Legacy for my job, I wouldn't. That's kind of where I am. And I think you guys are in agreement.
What? You don't want to get sewing Mycospawn hugs all day?
Honestly, I'm at the point where Oops All Spells or Entomb Reanimate with Force Backup are so difficult to just do anything fun or interesting in the face of that I almost welcome the games where I just get killed on turn 3 by sewing Mycospawn instead of turn 1 or 0 by the combo decks. I don't know. We did that whole thing last week. If you're interested, that episode is there. Listen to it on Spotify. Ding, ding. But what we're going to talk about this time is how to adjust to a sudden change in the metagame if something big happens, like a very powerful set comes out. Maybe they release another Throne of Eldraine. They release another Modern Horizons set. Or, hypothetically, they ban 2 to 5 cards.
So when something is banned or when something new gets released, there are often immediate and obvious consequences that we might call first order consequences. These are the obvious observations that happened. So for example, a while back, Initiative was very good, and so White Plume Adventurer got banned. So your first order consequences are things like a major card from Initiative just got banned, therefore the Initiative deck gets worse. Or something else obvious like Vexing Bauble was recently banned. Therefore, the counter spells that were being held in check by Vexing Bauble now have become more reliable.
and Psychic Frog getting banned, now those decks will have to find some other way to simulate either a beater or a looter. And there's some stuff like Ledger Shredder that you could just put in the spot that you used to be playing Psychic Frog. You know it's going to be worse, but we're trying to simulate this somehow. And those are the really obvious things. So what do we think? Do we want to talk about cards we think might get banned and what the first order consequences of those things are now? Or do we want to save that for later?
Why don't we lay out kind of the core network? Let's lay out the idea and then start getting into some examples.
Okay, so I think I'll posit the first one, which is one that I've been pretty clear about for a while, is Sowing Mycospawn is keeping in check all decks that want to just hit 3 or 4 land drops and get some 2-for-1s and eventually be ahead of their opponent. You just cannot do that in this current format. And if Sowing Mycospawn goes, those decks with solid mana and a bevy of 2-for-1s unlock. And those decks, that's the first order consequence. You can literally just like register Uro again, or you could register Teferi Time Raveler again in a deck other than Cephalid Breakfast. That's sort of the first order consequence. And that's what I'll save my second order consequences till we talk about that. But this is going to be the thread I tug on throughout the episode. What happens when Mycospawn's gone and we can play control again?
Yeah, and just in case you aren't dialed in on that number, we're sitting at about 17% control in the format right now, which is higher than it's been a couple times when I've checked recently.
Yeah, it's also important to remember where those decks are, though, because none of them are near the top of the format at all. That 17% is not like 8% miracles, 11%, whatever. It's tiny little 1 and 2% chunks. I'm looking at the front page of Goldfish right now for the last 30 days, and the 12 decks that fit on my screen, there's not a control deck among them. There is like 2 tempo decks, 2 stompy decks, and 9, 10, 11 combo decks. That's the format right now.
I am looking at MTG Top 8, which I'm guessing is where Phil got that 17% control. It is also lumped in dedicated prison decks, lands, Stoneblade, Cradle Control, and Life from the Loam decks in there. So it's not all blue control either. It's also putting in dedicated prison. So that's control plus prison being, that small of a percentage, which is truly shocking.
Right. And I am counting those decks when I say decks trying to get 2-for-1s and hit 3 or 4 land drops and make the game go longer. That includes Death and Taxes. It includes lands, even some of the mid-range Selesnya Adept style decks. Cradle Control has a combo button. I would call Cradle Control combo if I had to put it into one bucket or the other, but it does have those grindy control elements. I am counting all those when I say control is not good right now, not even remotely defensible right now. And for what it's worth, all of those decks are better than like Jeskai, Days Undoing, or like Uro Control, the things I would actually like to be doing. Those are all much worse than Black-White Death and Taxes right now.
I think some of the first order consequences might be sort of interesting, depending on what gets hit in blue-black Reanimator, because Entomb leaving and Troll of Khazad-dûm leaving are very, very different in terms of first order consequences.
I also believe that it depends on what Wizards does. I've seen some people clamor for both Entomb. So I've seen people clamor for 2 of 3. So we've talked about Entomb, Reanimate, Troll of Khazad-dûm. I've seen people saying 1 isn't enough, and I kind of think at this point 1 is enough. Like, that's really what I believe. I think you could take 1 of the 3, and Reanimator would be a fine deck still. But I've seen people say, no, you have to take Troll and 1 of the others, and I don't necessarily agree with that. So I think any consequences that happen to Reanimator depends on what shakes out, but I really do believe it should just be 1 at this point.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, taking 1 of those is hitting Reanimator in the knee with a baseball bat. Taking both of those at the same time is just like blowing off both legs. Like that is a big hit to take both of those at the same time.
Yeah, if we want to expand out the visual of physical violence on the Reanimator deck for cards getting banned, the Psychic Frog ban, I think, was ripping off its invisibility cloak. It's just not even a physical attribute that a human should have. It had wings in a running competition or something, and we just clipped the wings, the angelic feature, off of this thing that was supposed to be human. And now we're talking about, I think it would sprain their ankle if we take Troll of Khazad-dûm, and it would break their leg if we take Entomb. And I don't know how much of an injury this deck needs to get in line with the rest of us mortals. Taking both is just hacking off the whole leg. And in all of my crafting, and again, I want to remind everyone who might be listening, we have no power here. We do not work for Wizards of the Coast. We do not speak to play design. I don't have a phone I could call and tell people to ban Sewing Microspawn. I really just don't. And so all of my crafting has to be based on what I think and what I would do personally, which might not be what Wizards does. But in all of my theory crafting, I don't want to execute any decks. I don't think there is a deck in the format that isn't cool and enriching to exist in some capacity. I don't want Reanimator dead and gone, which is probably what the people who think you need to take Entomb and Troll of Khazad-dûm are thinking. They just are sick of Reanimator. They want it dead and gone. I don't want that. I want it in line. I don't want to take Sewing Microspawn, Glaring Fleshraker, and Kozilek's Command from Eldrazi. I just want Sewing Microspawn gone. I don't want to take Balustrade Spy and Undercity Informer and Dread Return from Oops All Spells. I want to take probably just Undercity Informer is what I would ban out of Oops All Spells, having more time to think about it since last week when we weren't sure. I would like to clip some decks back without murdering any decks outright. And that's kind of where I'm at.
So I would like to bring up something it's actually come up in the comment section of back-to-back episodes that we've done, which is Brian has mentioned that we don't communicate with Wizards of the Coast, or we don't have any real power. We've had a couple people push back and say, well, we influence how people think and how Wizards of the Coast could be listening to our episodes. That is the nature of all podcasts, right? Like, people make podcasts on entertaining your cats or how to take care of pets. And yes, people listen to podcasts because they want to expand their knowledge or learn about something. Just because somebody shares something doesn't mean that they're necessarily right or that anyone else will even agree with them. So yeah, sometimes we say things that people will disagree with. Maybe people will agree with us, who knows, but we don't have any real power here, which is what Brian is saying. And I don't know why I used the cat analogy because Phil started chuckling, but it came to my head, and well, Legacy stinks. So hopefully they do listen to us, but who knows?
Yeah, I don't know what that whole cat business was.
No. Bryant is onto something here. Maybe we don't have any real power because we haven't made nice or noises at Wizard of the Coast employees. I have never offered a Wizards of the Coast employee a churro or any sort of other cat treats. And honestly, maybe that's what we've been doing wrong as a community.
Yeah, maybe they just need some ear scritches and then they'll listen. Though I do have to say a funny story. Past weekend, the regional championship, which I guess was a week and a half ago, the U.S. regional championship, the one in Charlotte that Titty Pills won, shout out to the goddess. By the way, inventing a deck 3 years ago, becoming a master with that deck, and then getting a card unbanned that supercharges your deck that you built, that you're the master of, and then showing up to LCQ and then win the regional championship on the last week that card's going to be legal is some god shit. That's just a great Magic story. So shout out to Jesse for that. Side tangent aside, that was a side tangent of my side tangent. I'll get back to the first tangent. Todd Anderson at Tandy MTG tagged Dan Musser and was it was a medium aggressive thing. It was Dan, come on, man. At Dennis, come on, man. This is crazy. It's been like this for a year. You got to do something. And Dan was just hey, Todd, great to hear from you. I left Wizards of the Coast 4 months ago. I live in Vietnam. I'm raising my son here. And it was just a really funny, aggro dope on the internet, putting their energy in the wrong place moment. So shout out to Dan. He wrote the last BNR update, and then he actually did move with his family out of the country. He's no longer at Wizards. But back on track here. This podcast was very clear for months that we wanted Psychic Frog and Troll of Khazad-dûm or Reanimate to go. It was an and situation. We were very clear. Everything I tweeted, everything I said in a video, everything we said on this podcast was and. It was 2 cards have to go from Reanimator. And the ban update where Psychic Frog went did not mention the possibility of 2 cards going at all. It was as if they didn't even think about it. It was written by, our buddy Dan Musser, who's now off raising his child somewhere. There was, we thought about this, we thought about this, we thought about this. No mention of we might ban 2 cards. And unless he is taking dramatic efforts to make it sound like he didn't listen to the Eternal Glory podcast, then he clearly didn't listen to it, or else some mention of it was a pretty thorough thing. He went through his whole thought process, and nowhere in the thought process was 2 cards could go. So I really don't think that we have the ear of anyone. And if we are voicing the concerns of a larger group and somebody hears it, I think that's good. I don't know, like who needs to be protected here? The sickos killing us on turn 1 with their obviously broken deck that's out of line? I don't want to protect those people. They're sick. They need help.
Bryant has turned red, walked away from the camera, not even by the microphone anymore. He's losing it. Episode's great.
Well, it brings up a comment from last week's episode, which is how I hate every other combo deck that is better positioned than the Epic Storm, because I think that Reanimator is over the line and so is Oops All Spells, but I'm not allowed to say those things. Otherwise, it's like something against my own personal pet deck that I rarely even play these days, and how I'm always like, if I could be a Doomsday main, I could. That's just not good enough. So just made me laugh that we're out to get the turn 1 sickos after the people that listen to this think that I have vendettas against other combo decks.
Yeah, that's always one of my favorite threads among the randos where Brian Coval, want cards banned until I can play Uro again. That's not really true. I just don't want it to be insanely embarrassing to register cards in that range. Even when I am happy playing Control, it's rarely the best deck. Like the last time Control was truly the best deck, Oko was legal, right? And before that, it was Sensei's top. It's usually some Stompy deck, some combo deck, definitely a tempo deck in there somewhere. I'm not like, get us back to top miracles. I just want to evoke an Uro and have time to escape it later.
Yeah, in my head, this is a little different, but I do the same thing. In my head, it's the Knight of the Reliquary test. If I would be embarrassed to submit a list that had Knight of the Reliquary in it, Legacy is probably in a bad space. And the 3-drop that you have to untap with and then maybe have 2 to 3 turns of value with afterwards for it to really carry a game, it's not where we're at right now.
Yeah, Knight of the Reliquary is a great bellwether because there are Legacy formats where Knight of the Reliquary is on the stack, and I think I need Swords to Plowshares now. If they untap with this, it will take a few turns, but I will be pretty close to hard locked out of this game. Between the Sejiri steps and the, getting the maybe tutoring an Urza Saga for a side juke or like whatever it is, like I gotta deal with this now versus, haha, that's really slow. Versus the game's over and you don't even know your opponent has Knight of the Reliquary in their deck, which is where we are now. We're at like the level 3 of a system where we'd like to be at level 1.
All right, so since we mentioned the word systems, let's kind of get back on track here. So we talked about first order consequences. That is, what is the immediate thing that happens? What is the obvious? So the second order consequences are what happens as a result of the first order consequences.
Phil, I actually disagree with your first bullet here. I think there's a step before the fast combo picks up. Because I'm usually the one who preys on the second order consequence. People decide that their 4 and 5 drops are playable again. That's usually the first thing that happens. People are like, oh, great, I can finally play my, Opalescence deck again, or whatever.
The Fairy Hero of Dominaria? Bring him back?
Yes.
My king?
Exactly. And then people go, oh, LOL, register combo, and then run those people over. I believe that's the true first bullet of second order consequences, is that people believe 5 drops are back.
Okay, so my bullet points in the show notes that the audience can't see are examples of things that could be second order consequences. So reading some of my hypotheticals, fast combo picked up after X ban, therefore my highly interactive Delver deck will be better. Or control picked up after Y ban, therefore, my deck that tries to end the game before they get established will be better. But yes, I agree with you. One of the immediate things that happens is that people think the jank has been freed, so they get out their 4 drops, they get out their ridiculous cards that I normally like to cast as a crazy person, and they try to shove them into real decks.
Right. It is jank. It is old favorites and it's the card Stifle. Those are the things that come back in like the first week after a major format shakeup. You guys are both laughing, but you know it's true.
It's so fucking true.
Yeah, like the week after the ban, whatever happens, if one singular card goes, you're going to have to think about Stifle more than normal for like 3 days on Magic Online before people remember that card is not good. People will return to things that they like. If Sowing Mycospawn goes in this update, I will be registering Uro and or Up the Beanstalk immediately. There was just a spoiler that came out today of Rakshasa's Dealings or something. I don't know the name, but it's a bug hybrid card where it costs 2/B, 2/U, 2/G. So it is a 6-drop that you could cast for 3, triggers Up the Beanstalk. It's an instant. You look at 4 cards, put 2 in your hand, 2 in the graveyard. That is my shit all day, every day. I was playing Sauron's Ransom in Bug Beans before. That doesn't even trigger my bean, and it's probably worse than this card anyway. I am in, and I want to do that. But I can't do that if Sowing Mycospawn's around. And maybe a card like that, a clunky thing, exposes me to Wasteland like crazy, exposes me to Blood Moon like crazy, gets Pyroblasted, gets Spell Pierced, gets Dazed like crazy. This card might suck, but I'm going to cast it. And that's going to be an immediate second order consequence if the boot gets off the neck of control decks.
So if you are able to correctly predict the second order consequences, this is how you reap those Magic Online treasure chests. Like, you get in there, you get a whole bunch of ticks. If you correctly predict what people are going to be doing as the second order consequence, and you can start adapting to that, as we'll get to in a minute, you can do really, really well. So for example, right after the previous ban wave, I think it was pretty obvious that a lot of people were going to be trying out Eldrazi. So if you are like expecting that and you start showing up with Blood Moons in your deck or Harbinger of the Seas in your sideboard, your deck is probably going to be really well positioned.
Yeah, it was Eldrazi and Nadu were the two that were being spoken about in the last ban update that could have had action taken against them, but then just simply didn't. So first order consequence, I would consider that a first order consequence of potentially ban-worthy decks that did not get hit. Now we play those. And then the second order consequence is I'm going to Blood Moon those jerks. Or I'm going to have a bunch of consigned to memories which line up against both Eldrazi and Thassa's Oracle pretty well. Those are second order consequences. And to tug on my thread from earlier, the if Sowing Mycospawn goes, then I can play Uro again thread. The second order consequence is that probably makes Delver worse. Delver is unlikely to be affected by any bans. I think that deck is in a good spot right now, but its meta share is likely to go down if the decks that naturally counter it or can be natural predators to it get unlocked from behind the Sowing Mycospawn paywall.
Just a quick note. Earlier I mentioned how we're not always right with our thoughts. I do think that we were wrong about Nadu. We expected Nadu to be on the top. We expected it to be fairly dominant, and it seems to be just fine. Is it extremely annoying? No doubt. But annoying is not ban-worthy. And I think now banning Nadu would seem a little silly, despite it just being boring.
Yeah, I hate the shit out of Nadu. I hate playing against that card. I don't enjoy playing with that card, even when it is quite good. But I sure can't in any reasonable capacity justify banning that card based on meta percent or win rate or anything like that.
There is one factor that I don't think needs a lot of weight, but we do need to at least acknowledge, which is Magic Online has gone through pretty unprecedented periods of lag lately. The Daybreak team has done a good job fixing one part of the leak, and then a week later it starts leaking somewhere else. And Nadu is not a deck that can actually register if every click takes 3 to 5 seconds of buffering to resolve. And I know there are people who strongly believe Nadu is bannable and is as good as we thought it was, but cannot show up in the Moto results because you cannot play it on Moto if there is any lag going on. I just want to acknowledge that, but at the same time, Underworld Breach combo just won a regional championship. It is the number 1 deck on Magic Online. It is a deck you run into in leagues, and it suffers from many, if not more, of those lag issues, and it's still dominating. So I don't know. I don't think that is where the problem is with Nadu. though it probably did dissuade some people from playing it.
All right. Well, why don't we take a second here to shout out how absolutely awesome Moxfield.com is.
I personally just updated my Casual Commander deck, Phil, and I know you're probably not going to believe me because Casual Commander just came out of my mouth, but it's true. I've been working on a Casual Commander Cycle Storm deck, and it's very, very sweet. I made a YouTube short about it, and I was like, hey, I need help making this because I'm cutting the Zerta stuff and working on it from there. And upon making that short, I had 50 to 100 people start commenting on Moxfield about, how I can make the deck better, and you really can build a community over there as well.
That's awesome. Because I remember the last time you tried to build that deck.
And you didn't know how your commander worked, and you ruined your life. You spent a bunch of money on Japanese foils and a bunch of time, and then realized the deck just fundamentally did not work.
Correct.
I'm glad you found a workaround.
We're back, baby. Casual Commander. It says I'm bracket 3. I'm not sure what that means still, but we're there, baby.
It means you have some game changers, but not enough to break the game. You can change but not break.
All right. So beyond these second level consequences, you start getting to the adaptation to the adaptation. And this is where you start seeing the metagame start to function. So if people are doing X thing to beat Y deck, then maybe I should be the one playing Z thing to beat the X that people are doing to try to beat Y.
Yes, another simple explanation is rock, paper, and scissors. If people are bringing their rocks because scissors meta has been dominating, and you bring paper into scissors meta because people are going to be bringing rocks, then that's the adaptation. And yeah, Phil nailed it. This is literally just what a healthy moving metagame looks like. And if the format gets to a place of balance, we will see things change where maybe that first week combo still dominates, people thinking it's okay to register up the beanstalk again, just losing to Doomsday. And then we get a switch where Delver comes in and chews up the Doomsday players. And then Uro comes in and chews up the Delver players. And then Doomsday comes back. This is what we want. We should not see the same 2 decks winning every tournament. We should see 5 or 6 decks reasonably spread through the top 8 with a few surprises. I think a healthy metagame has some surprising jank in at least 1 out of every 2 top 8s. If we have 3 or 4 challenges a week and we're getting those premier level top 8s, I want to see Esper Stoneblade pop up once in a while, or Green White Depths spike a tournament here and there. Combo elves, traditional combo elves, non-cradle control. I want to see that stuff break through. And I think that is a sign of people either finding holes that they can exploit, or you could just play more stuff because the format's more open.
I think that Pauper actually has a great example of people are doing X, so they're playing Y and Z to beat X and that sort of thing. The top deck in Pauper is Mono Red Burn or Kadoltha Red. And then Grixis Affinity and Judd Brood-Scale are decks that are reasonably good against that Red Burn deck, but also against each other. There's been another deck that has emerged, Jund Wildfires, that is okay against the red deck, but not great. But it kicks the ever-living crap out of Grixis Affinity and then the Brood-Scale combo decks. So it knows that it's not great against the top deck, but it's good against the decks that prey on the top deck, and it's at least serviceable against the top deck. And you might be saying, why is it Jund? Because it gives you the post-board Weather the Storms and other things that help in the other matchups. But I think that's a really good example of something that might be a little bit off meta that could be really competitive because it beats on the other top things. And I think that deck's really cool and interesting.
Right, and I've made this point many times in the past year and a half, taking Oath of Druids to Eternal Weekend in 2023. Jewel Shops was one of the top decks. It was in contention. There were 2 top decks. It was either Lurrus Control or Jewel Shops. And Oath is phenomenal versus Lurrus Control and terrible versus Jewel Shops. But Lurrus Control had a huge edge over Jewel Shops. So I crushed the best deck. I get crushed by the second best deck, but the best deck crushes the best deck, which means if I could survive a few rounds of the tournament without getting Jewel Shopped, the Lurrus deck should suppress my Predator, and then I get to be the Predator. And there are exploitable spots like that. And at this point, Oath is pretty established as a top 5 vintage deck, has been for a while, but it was like a bottom top 10 deck at the time, where just exploring that space and finding the weekend where it made a lot of sense.
And I think a lot of times when you are going like deep in deck selection and making kind of a dark horse deck selection, there's a lot of times where if you get into the winner's metagame, you will be paid off heavily, but sometimes you are taking a gamble in the early rounds. So for example, Death and Taxes is often a deck that does well in a winner's metagame, but against some of the fringe stuff at the edges of the format, you might have very, very bad matchups. So historically, for a long time, that was like Elves. If Elves was popular in the metagame, like playing D&T was just risky, even if you might body, say, the Delver decks that were very popular. I think this skill of being able to adapt to other adaptations is most important when you have a quickly moving metagame. If you are at your small local shop and you kind of know what everybody is going to play every week, the adaptation to the adaptation doesn't matter quite as much. Whereas if you're doing Magic Online challenges, where the people might look at the results from Friday to change their deck for Saturday or Sunday, like that is a very different thing in terms of speed. And if you're not up to date on the highest and like hottest tech, like you might be missing out on some of your edges.
Right. And these can be small changes, like you have different tutor bullets in your Death and Taxes package, or it could be big changes, like now I'm white-black instead of mono-white, or now I'm Mardu instead of white-black. And if we look back at the domination that Jerry Thompson had in the early days of the SCG circuit, when Callblade was the deck in Standard, there was a stock list, but Jerry never played it. Jerry would win with something close to stock, and then the next week, he would be on a build that splashes black to chew up the stock list. And then the next week after that, he would be on a red list that didn't care about the black list discard. And then when people got onto his red list, he'd be back on the stock list that beats the red list. And he just farmed the entire Magic community for years doing this, just tiny adjustments to something that he was already good at. And that is what we want to see. And these tiny adjustments, it is tough to make tiny adjustments when your sideboard just needs 4 Leyline of the Void to be competitive. Do I put a Boggart Trawler into my Recruiter of the Guard package in case I need graveyard hate? Doesn't matter if you're dead before you have 3 mana to even recruit for the Trawler in the first place. We need room to be able to make these little movements, basically.
I have so many YouTube comments that are, hey, isn't Fairy Macabre better in this list? Because like you could reanimate it, or it has synergy with this other card. And I always just tell these people, like, the synergy doesn't matter right now. Like, you just need Leyline or you're dead. And even if you do have Leyline, you might not beat the sideboard juke that's coming anyway.
Yeah, it's weird. I feel like 9 months ago on this channel, we were like, holy smokes, blue decks are playing Fairy Macabre. That's how fast the format is now. This is broken. And now Fairy Macabre's too slow too. It's wild. We have, and this is a thread that keeps coming up in the pods when we talk. And it's like we went into the high gravity training center and we got really strong.
The whole, no. Hold up. The high gravity training center?
Hyperbolic time chamber.
Fuck it, Brian. Like, we have to put respect on the name of the hyperbolic time chamber. Damn it. Some things are sacred.
Sure. Whatever, nerd. We went in there and like we had to learn how to beat Psychic Frog. We had to learn how to compete with these things, and we learned how to build decks that can decide a game by turn 2. And then only one of those decks got banned, and everything that was hanging with that deck did not get banned. And is this just a big card pool problem and it's fine? Or can we find a little room to breathe again?
I think Oops All Spells is a very, very good example to talk about like the adaptation to adaptation. So many people were bringing in these ley lines to beat Oops All Spells, right? And so then Oops All Spells would do things like, okay, I'm going to bring in a Barrogoyf, and I'm just going to Dark Ritual into that on turn 1, and you're going to lose the game to that because you just boarded out all of your Swords to Plowshares or Solitude or whatever you were going to have to remove that. And there are also multiple different Oops All Spells sideboard packages that could be seeing play. We have talked about, the Goblin Charbelcher juke, for example. Sometimes people will have other fair creatures, like Douthie Voidwalkers. So in like the very micro term, you need to know what are Oops All Spells players doing on any given week. And then there's the level of bullshit beyond that. What are the really good Oops All Spell players going to do that know you are going to expect them to be doing X?
Right. Yeah, we've been teeing off on Oops All Spells for a few weeks now on the pod. And I do think it is a deck that has crept over the line. The community always doing the work, improving that deck month after month, year after year, cracked it. And unfortunately, in this game, the prize you get for winning is your deck gets a card banned. And that's just kind of where we are. The work that they've been doing is awesome and so frustrating as someone trying to keep up with it. I played against Oops All Spells in a tournament recently. I've played a couple just smaller scale legacy tournaments the last few weekends locally. And what do you do? They just reaching for the Swords to Plowshares, hacking those out, cutting the fatal pushes. You can't. Do you even bring in Null Rod? Does it matter? Do you even bring in your Graveyard Hate? And that kind of it always reminds me of the scene in A Knight's Tale, one of my favorite movies, where Heath Ledger is given advice he aims high on your left shoulder, lean really hard to the right. And then Heath Ledger's like, yeah, but if he goes for the right, I'll die. And the guy's like, well, yeah, I'm not saying we're not taking a risk. On that next joust, he leans really hard to the right. The other guy just straight up misses and he gets a shot in. But that only works once. And like Phil said, with those high level players who what they're going to do, but they know what they're going to do. At the Star City 10K that I won with Cephalid Breakfast a couple years ago at this point, I played against Tony Scapone in the top 4. And I know that he's a deck that can win on turn 1. I know he knows that I wouldn't keep a hand that can't stop that. But he knows that. So my plan of just keep any playable 7, I'll ponder into a hate piece eventually, and he's going to spend time discarding me or taking it slow, like trying to set up an Urza Saga, which works against most combo players, might or may not work against Tony, depending on what level we each land at. Maybe I did mulligan to Force of Will. Maybe I didn't. Maybe he sends it into a 7-card keep. Maybe he doesn't. And when you're at that level, it becomes really complicated to navigate. And that level is complicated to navigate when you know the list. And when Oops All Spells could have a Rotting Regisaur or Goblin Charbelcher, you don't even know anything. It's impossible.
So let's go back to this Knight's Tale thing for a second, because I think that's actually really good. I think sometimes if you want to be doing the adaptation to the adaptation, you do have to be willing to send it with something that is somewhat risky, right? Sometimes if you are trying to play the metagame, you are making a called shot that very strongly says, I think that people are reacting to the current format by doing X thing. I'm going to do the thing that beats X, but if I'm wrong, my deck might be bad. And sometimes the result is a deck that is good for exactly one weekend, one tournament, one point in time. Brian, the first, I think, conversation I ever had with you was actually about this exact situation in Modern, of all places.
Yeah, the Star City Invitational that I won, I think that was 2016 or closing in on a decade since that tournament.
Oh, my bones.
And I know, my bones. But Death and Taxes was not an established Modern deck. The best 2 decks in that format were Grixis Death Shadow and Eldrazi. And being a deck that could main deck Mirren Crusader and play Ghost Quarter Leonin Arbiter and just shut down these decks with greedy mana bases and spotty removal with bigger creatures. And it was an angle that I saw. And my path in that tournament, the Modern rounds happened first on day 1. I think I went 2 and 3 in the first 5 Modern rounds, or maybe it was like 1 and 3. Maybe there was 4 rounds, maybe there was 5. But I started that tournament with a very poor record. And then I exoed the Standard rounds and re-entered the Modern rounds the next day against the winner's metagame. Instead of the random round 1 metagame, I was now against the winner's metagame. and just sort of waltzed my way to the trophy from there because I was playing against those decks I expected. But yeah, I played against like, I don't know, Bant Collected Company or Kiki Jiki Combo early in day one, and it whipped my ass because I was not ready for that with my Leonin Arbiters. But then I went 3-0. It was best of 5. I went 3-0 in my top 8 match, 3-0 in my top 4 match, and then 3-1. My final opponent did get a game off me. The audacity of that. Yeah, that if you survive that early randomness, you become unstoppable. But maybe you go 3 and you never get there.
I would like to go back to Oops All Spells for a moment. So earlier in the episode, Brian said that he would ban Undercity Informer. I've had extensive talks with my good friend Alex McKinley, and Alex is just vehemently like, no, you have to ban both. Ban both, just kill the deck, I'm sick of it. And, it wasn't really open to our discussion in the last episode about Dread Return. So Alex feels very strongly. I've listened to his arguments over the last few weeks. I think if you don't want to outright kill the deck, it has to be Undercity Informer, because one of the top cards that you can play right now that we've been praising all episode is Consigned to Memory. Consigned to Memory you can use against Balustrade Spy. So that's a plus. And then what does the deck do if it's going to keep on existing after that? So you probably have to play 4 Goblin Charbelcher. That's another card that Consigned to Memory hits. But also, Force of Negation. One of the things about the deck right now is that Force of Negation isn't actually good against it. Like, yeah, they sometimes have like 2 main deck Goblin Charbelcher and like 2 more on the board. They'd have to play 4 in the main deck. And that means that Force of Negation is now a live card. And many people don't know this, but being a Pauper combo guy, I definitely know this. A card called Destroy the Evidence exists. It is essentially the same thing as Balustrade Spy, except it's a 5-mana sorcery where you have to destroy your own land, and then you mill your entire library. It's a sorcery. So you need to have a land in play, and then it costs 5. So you mill your entire library, you trigger your Narcomoebas, get back your Poxwalkers, win the game. Guess what? Force of Negation also hits that. So they could play Destroy the Evidence, they could play Goblin Charbelcher, but now they're opening themselves up to Consign the Memory and Force of Negation, which they haven't been doing in the past. And maybe the deck can exist on that axis while allowing a couple more cards to hit it that they couldn't in the past.
Right. That's why I've been saying Undercity Informer. I didn't just, pick a card at random. I didn't flip a coin. Undercity Informer, everything you just said. And there's also Beseech the Mirror. They could go that way, where they just have redundant Balustrade Spies instead of Belcher, or maybe in addition to Belcher. But giving another squeeze point of both Consigned to Memory and Force of Negation on that deck, I think is a reasonable way to bring it in line without icing it outright. And I like that giving more interaction spots on the Balustrade Spy feels right to me, because they've solved the Graveyard Shell. And now if they flip their deck, they win. A Surgical, a Fairy Macabre, it doesn't matter anymore. You have to stop them from flipping the deck, and giving more interaction points on that spot is meaningful, and especially if they're cards that people actually just play, and it doesn't require something weird like banning Jack-O-Lantern to make them soft to graveyard hate again. I think Undercity Informer makes a lot of sense. And again, going back to earlier in this episode, this is me trying to protect a deck that is over the line. I could say ban Dread Return. I could say ban Spy and Informer. We could ban Thassa's Oracle, which, as we talked about last week, hurts other decks more than it hurts this deck. I want this deck to exist, and I want it to exist in a way that is, fair to people who want to play the format.
I don't know, Brian. I just hate all other combo decks. Sorry. Gotta ban them all.
We could just ban Lion's Eye Diamond and solve a lot of problems all at once. Yeah, I'm coming for you at this point.
What's that? Ban Dark Ritual? Is that what you said?
Yeah, Dark Ritual for sure. Yeah, we'll ban that one.
Well, Brian, you've made it clear a couple times recently that if you weren't the Epic Storm guy, you would main Doomsday. And if we ban LED, you just get to main Doomsday. And it's not a slight to your brand. Like, you played it to the very end.
That's true. All right. I'm pro ban LED. Let's go.
Well, that should be clipped into the historical archives. We should put that on a golden disc and put it into a satellite and send it to alien civilizations to remember Earth's culture. is Bryant Cook saying Lion's Eye Diamond should be banned in Legacy. Or do we want to run through some hypotheticals? Do we want to do like a quick, got like 10 minutes left here, I think. Let's make a hierarchy. If we think Wizards of the Coast takes some of the action we want, but not all of it, I guess let's just re-articulate. I would like Undercity Informer, Sowing Mycospawn, and Troll of Khazad-dûm banned. That's what I would do if I had the magic wand. What would you guys do? Like, just give me a list. We've already know our reasons.
Just that exact thing. Bryant is just pointing.
No, I was.
Well, he's pointing at you to answer first.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I'm the other way on the screen. Okay. I would be okay with those same bans. My position is that I think one of either Troll or Entomb needs to go. I am slightly more on the Entomb side, but I can honestly go either way with that.
We're not doing baby gloves. You prefer Entomb? Entomb's your list for the purposes of this exercise.
All right, Entomb's my list.
Okay, Brian.
Undercity Informer, Sowing Mycospawn, and Entomb. There's been a couple people in our comments section being like, Entomb is a pillar of the format. No, it's not. It was unbanned in 2009. It hasn't been around the whole time. One person was very upset. They're like, this card has been the entire duration of Legacy, or whatever, legal.
Literally not true.
And it's just flat out not true. Like, if you're going to like be that angry in the comments section, at least try to be right.
Great. Another great sound point. If you're going to be angry, try to be right. Okay. So we agree on Mycospawn, Undercity Informer, and we are split on what we would do about Reanimator, but we're, within, it's like a 49-51 situation. So if Wizards of the Coast bans Troll of Khazad-dûm and nothing else, what does our metagame look like?
So the blue decks have to play a couple more lands now because they don't get to cheat on the land count. Sometimes you get to do things like keep a hand that is Wasteland plus Troll. You don't get to do that anymore. So land count of the average deck that was playing Troll probably goes up by about 2. 1 if you're real greedy, or you need a couple other cantrips in the spot where Troll was.
I actually disagree. I think that the Reanimator decks, assuming that they lose Troll of Khazad-dûm, can no longer afford to play Wasteland. I don't think the actual land count goes up. I just think that they lose the ability to also be a tempo deck.
I would agree with that. And that also, banning Troll of Khazad-dûm removes 4 of their Entomb effects from their deck. How many monsters do they have to play? Are they just going to play like 12 cantrips to find one of their 4 Entombs to get one of their 2 monsters into play? Are they going to up their monster count and play some Careful Study, Faithless Looting kind of effects? What actually changes after that? Because the idea of just going up a couple lands or losing Wasteland tells only half the story, and it's not the important half. The important half is 4 of their Entombs are gone now too, which turns off their 8 Reanimates.
I believe we already have somewhat of an answer to that question, if I'm being honest. If you look at some of the Magic Online results, there's a lot of results of mono black Reanimator where it's really just black Reanimator splashing, either green for the Witherbloom package or red for Faithless Looting. But I'll be honest, the Faithless Looting ones aren't nearly as popular at this point. It's really just them going, okay, I'll unmask myself or unmask as protection if I already have the Entomb. So unmask just becomes more playable. So instead of running Force of Negation and some of these other flex spots, they just run unmask.
Oh, that is not the way I thought you were going to go with that. I thought you were going to be talking about the Dimir tempo deck that just straight up plays 4 Reanimates with no unfair things to support them. I thought you were going to go in the direction of like they become more tempo heavy and still just have an emergency eject, oops, I win button.
What is the eject button? They have 4 Reanimates and nothing to cheat out? Like, I don't understand that.
So you are a fair blue-black tempo deck that needs to play additional early game threats, things like Delvers, but then you have 4 Entombs and 2 targets as the like, I still have this button that I can hit to win the game when my tempo thing doesn't work.
Okay, so yeah.
Instead of Reanimate being plan 1, it becomes plan 2.
Okay, sure. Yeah, the way you said that at first sounded like it was literally just blue-black tempo with 4 Reanimates in it, without Entomb or monsters. Yeah, like they could be a Delver deck that sometimes draws an Entomb when they need a Nethergoyf. I guess Entomb could be Nethergoyf. Like they draw Entomb when they need a brainstorm or something. That is a direction they could go. I think that we would see these decks kind of spiral out. It's been so free. I'm collecting my thoughts here in real time. The deck you described does not play Animate Dead, does it?
No.
Okay, so that's the difference. The full 8 efficient reanimate spells in a deck that only has 4 Entombs does not work. That's too many dead cards when you don't have this one little thing. You would need some sort of Tainted Indulgence with enough monsters that you'd see one before you see a reanimate along the way. It just gets clunkier, which is all I want. I don't want the deck dead. I just want it worse.
So I do have some examples of things that people can do, and some of them are even more recent results, because I'm looking at Goldfish right now. Curator of Mysteries by Ozymandias17. Ozzy is a well-respected member of the community, playing 2 copies of Curator of Mystery, 3 Brazen Borrower, and then 2 Metamorphosis Fanatic. So Fanatic is definitely a card that could come back if Troll ends up leaving, because now they have more slots in order to fit it, which is all that card's ever wanted. And if they are playing more copies of Fanatic, Street Wraith is a card that we talked about probably a couple months ago, is a card that synergizes well with it, because it can trigger the Fanatic on the opponent's turn. It's a free card to get back. So cyclers like Street Wraith and Curator of Mysteries are still available. And Street Wraith kind of goes into your cantrip package while still being something that you can just go cycle, reanimate, all that stuff. Is it less powerful than Troll of Khazad-dûm? Absolutely. But it's a choice that they still have, is just pivoting into more Fanatics plus Street Wraith, or even the Curator of Mysteries that Ozymandias is doing.
Right. And Ozzy's list here, the Curator, he's still playing for Troll of Khazad-dûm, for what it's worth. He has cut all the Wastelands, which we identified would be necessary to do if you were going to move to something else. And the Curator takes a blue to cycle and doesn't get you a land drop. It's just actually 1 blue, draw a random card. So
I'm going to do the audio format thing real quick and just read this card, because I don't think this is one that a lot of our audience is going to know.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. 2 blue, 4/4 Flying Sphinx. Whenever you cycle or discard another card, scry 1, cycling for a blue. So it is a full turn slower, 2 turns slower. No, 1 turn slower on the clock. The Troll of Khazad-dûm. You can block it with 1 card. Something like a Tameo could buy you a turn. You don't get to keep a hand that's like Wasteland Troll Reanimate based on this. You actually do need blue to get it rolling. It is worse in basically every way than Troll, but it does simulate that experience. You could replace Troll with one of the other cards from Troll's cycle. Just play the Generous Ent, but you can chump block that thing forever. It's kind of a lot of roads converge on Troll of Khazad-dûm in the size of the thing, the evasion of the thing, and it is the correct color for the deck you want to be in anyway.
You can go into Grixis if you want to play like Faithless Looting, and then you could play Oliphant. But Oliphant is a lot worse than Troll. Trust me, I have spent a lot of time forcing bad Rakdos decks. There's a massive difference between reanimating those 2 creatures.
Right. And I thought about all these things too. That's the whole point. I don't even care if you cycle Generous Ent or Oliphant and then reanimate it. I think that's cool even. All this jank we've been talking about, Phil, you and I, the decks we try to staple together and make work with Troll and Reanimate, Oliphant might still do what it needs to in a jank pile, but to be a tier 1, probably even S tier deck for over a year now, despite multiple bannings, Troll is just hiding under this surface here, making all these pieces work.
So I would like to make one note about the Curator of Mysteries. It plays a similar role to Grief, and I'm not trying to say it's nearly as powerful as Grief, but Grief was nice that in the face of graveyard hate, you could go, okay, I will tap 4 lands and put my large thing into play. 4 mana for a 4/4 flyer in Legacy is quite large. Like, I know that sounds silly, but like, what other flying threats outside of like a Troxa fight this thing?
Murktide Regent.
Okay, I guess. Yeah, there's Murktide, I'm sorry.
I've seen that one in decks.
Oh, have you?
I don't know what you're seeing out there.
But like, in actuality, like, Curator's pretty big, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It beats up Channeler and Delver Secrets and things like that. Like, I can see why somebody would want to play this.
Sure, yeah, and I know a lot of people right now are exploring different shells with, like, they're already I know, like, I think Ikobaronin, maybe Menguchi, like creators have already done exhibitions where, Troll of Khazad-dûm's banned. What does this deck look like? Reanimate's banned. What does this deck look like now? Some of that content does exist out there. Also, Ozymandias' final record in this tournament that we're talking about was 4-3. He must have bubbled into top 8 at X2 and then lost immediately. Like, this isn't even like a good record. But that's not really the point. I was hoping to do like 5 or 6 of these little exercises in the 10 minutes we had, and then we spent the whole 10 minutes on what if just Troll of Khazad-dûm gets banned. But I think it was a good conversation.
I think the fact that it took us that long to kind of think about it in real time shows how good of a ban that troll ban might be, because if there is not an immediate like, oh, we just do this and move on, that is showing us that we are taking a fundamental piece out of a deck.
I am not convinced Troll's enough, though. I think that there's a good chance that it's still the top deck after, but I'm open to being wrong.
So here's the thing. We have seen Wizards of the Coast take light touches consistently in Eternal formats. I think that they, although you and I and our listeners are playing these formats day in and day out, I think Wizards of the Coast is comfortable letting it be still a little rotten for 3 or 4 months while they gently turn dials. And I think if you ban Troll of Khazad-dûm, which is a common from a set that was one of the best-selling sets in Magic's history, you could get a set of these things for $3. If you ban that and it doesn't do the trick, unbanning it and then banning Entomb down the road is a lever you can pull. I think if you ban Entomb now, it's over. And like people selling off their Entombs, having to rebuy Entombs if they decide it's okay again in the future. I would rather turn the small knob than the big one and still have the big one available down the road.
So it's worth noting that Entomb, I'm looking at it right now, is not that much money. You can get play sets for like $45 according to Goldfish. And granted, $45 isn't nothing. I'm just saying it's not a ton of money. And I do think that there's ways that you can build the deck without Entomb. You could lean into Faithless Looting or Careful Study. Unmask is something that's seeing a lot of play right now in these Reanimator strategies. I don't think it would actually go away. I just think the toolbox nature of Reanimator would change. They couldn't play one Atraxa, one Sire of Insanity, one Archon of Cruelty, one Gristlebrand, that sort of thing. They would just have to go back to actually playing creatures, which is what Reanimator was pre-unban.
Yeah, the old red-black Reanimator deck, the Eric Landon Reanimator deck, I thought was awesome at the time and appropriate at the time because the creature it played 4 of was Chancellor of the Annex. And sometimes it did end up in those ugly games where it was like, turn 1, reveal Chancellor, unmask myself, take Chancellor, reanimate Chancellor, and hope you can't get through this Daze monster before it hits you 4 times. And those are kind of the ugly games that had to happen when you had to like unmask yourself, go down 2 cards, and just play the monster you were dealt. And that deck still had Entomb, it still had a nut draw, but it was also using cards like Unmask, which is a 2-for-1, Dark Ritual, which costs you a card to get off the ground to then cast another card. The fail case was so much heavier. There were bigger risks to taking your swing. And I would like to see maybe all these Horizon sets and Lord of the Rings, whatever the hell, have put that traditional type of Reanimator deck over the line, and we need to take Entomb. But I would like to see what that deck looks like before we kill the archetype, or at least take it that far down.